I'm Mike Ryan. In Turquoise in America Part 1, the Great American Turquoise Rush, 1890 to 1910, in Chapter 1, we talk about what Philip and I call the first American Turquoise Rush, which is the story of the early prehistoric turquoise mining by the Ancestral Puebloan. You know, in every area that we have found turquoise in the Southwest, we have found incidents of prehistoric mining in the form of stone hammers. So we know there was extensive mining done in the prehistoric period. We're not quite sure how early that was, but one good example came from something we talk about in Turquoise in America, Part 1, Great American Turquoise Rush, 1890 to 1910. And I'd like to read from that. Although it has long been suspected that an extensive turquoise trade existed between Mesoamerica and the American Southwest, scientific proof has only recently been able to support these theories. Building upon the research of Mathian, Harbottle, and Wiegand, and others, new advances in research techniques have demonstrated that the turquoise artifacts in and around Pueblo Bonito originated not only from the Cerrillos area, but also from areas of present-day California, Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona. A database of 22 turquoise resource areas in the United States and northern Mexico has been compiled using the capabilities of isotope ratios of hydrogen and copper. When turquoise examples from Pueblo Bonito were compared to this database, it was discovered that 29 artifacts sampled, 13 were linked to turquoise deposits at Cerrillos and the Jarillo Mountains of New Mexico, and Villa Grove, Colorado, plus 4 others were linked to Crescent Peak and Lone Mountain in Nevada. So we know that during the early period, there was extensive mining, turquoise mining, by the Ancestral Puebloan. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through a chronological explanation of different pueblos here in the Santa Fe area around Cerrillos, where so much of the turquoise that was found in Pueblo Bonito was sourced. So Chaco Canyon was where Pueblo Bonito was located. And the archaeologists estimate that Chaco Canyon existed from about 850 AD to 1150. And it was a center for ceremony and trade. So we've demonstrated in Part 1 about the importance of Chaco Canyon. You know, in that early period with the Ancestral Puebloan, we're still just learning a lot about that early period. But we know that they were cliff dwellers. They lived in cities, in pueblos. And that means you have to have a means to grow your food because you're not moving around as a hunter-gatherer. So they were really dependent upon a water source for their water and for their irrigation, for growing the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And all of the pueblos are all connected in some way to some river, some source of water. The Pueblo of San Marcos was important to the mining of turquoise at Cerrillos because it's only about 1 mile from Mount Chachahuitl. It was just right there, and we assume that it was the San Marcos Indians that were doing most of the mining there in the prehistoric period at Cerrillos. Now, we have around Santa Fe, we have this confluence of different pueblos, and they're all coming out of their ancestral Puebloan background, but what's interesting is they speak different languages. So we have the Tiwa culture, which would be from the San Juan Pueblo, which is Okeawinge, which is around modern day Española, going down to Tosuki. And we also consider that Arroyo Hondo was also affiliated with Tewa culture, and that was just south of Santa Fe. In contrast, The Pueblo at San Marcos has connections to both Carasan, which would be Cochiti, and Santo Domingo, or Kiwa, and Tewa. And we know that because the name, or the colonial name, was San Marcos. But in Carasan, which is the language of Cochiti and Santo Domingo, it was called Corn Pueblo. And in Tewa, which is the language of the Tewa Pueblos north of Santa Fe, it was called Turquoise Pueblo. Now, the archaeologists have done the excavations there, and they estimate that that Pueblo was there from 1200 to 1680. It really disbanded at the time of the Indian Revolt, the Pueblo Revolt. And by the time the Mexicans, the Spanish, returned in 1692, the Pueblo had been abandoned. It was one of the largest Pueblos with over 2,000 rooms. But we know that there was a lot of turquoise found from the Cerrillos area of Pueblo Bonito, and that area was abandoned around 1200. So that really indicates that there was turquoise mining there much earlier than the origin of the San Marcos Pueblo. Arroyo Hondo is real interesting because it's about 6 miles south of Santa Fe. And then if you go kind of southwest from there, you have San Marcos, which is no more than, I would say, 8 to 10 miles away. And then from Arroyo Hondo, you go about 15 miles and you have Pecos. Now, Pecos Pueblo is real fascinating because as early as 1200, there was the Forked Lightning Pueblo on Glorieta Creek in Pecos. So that was the early period of a pueblo at the area which would become Pecos. The classic period was 1325 to 1600. And that's really where the Pecos Pueblo became one of the largest of all the pueblos. There were a number of large pueblos in this area because San Marcos had up to 2,000 rooms, one of the very largest. Arroyo Hondo Pueblo had up to 1,000, although they only were there for about 150 to 200 years because the droughts came in and they abandoned that pueblo. At Pecos, it was a center of trade between the Pueblo peoples, which would have been the Tewa, the Jemes, because the Pecos Pueblo were the same origin, had the same language as the Jemes Pueblo. And in fact, after the excavation of the Pecos Pueblo in the early 1900s, the bodies that were excavated went to the Smithsonian, and in 1999, those were repatriated, and it was the Jemes tribe that took those back. So it's really in their tradition, when the Pecos Pueblo was abandoned around, I think that was early 1800s, mid 1800s, finally abandoned, they went to the Jemes Pueblo. So it was a center of trade between these different peoples, Jemes, Carasan, and later Apache and Navajo, with the Plains Indians, primarily the Kiowa and the Comanche. And that's a real fascinating story about all that trade that was taking place at that time. So that's kind of the background about this area, what was taking place. To bring the turquoise into it, I did an interview with Joshua Bingham. Now, Joshua's family has lived on the location of the old San Marcos Pueblo. And he said on times when he's been walking around, he has found various little tiny pieces of turquoise. And what's really fascinating is that it shows indications of hand pump drilling. So they've started to drill the hole in the little piece of turquoise so it'd be a tab piece that they could put on a string and uses it to make necklaces and whatnot. And because of the connection with San Marcos and Santo Domingo, we know Santo Domingo has long been associated with turquoise beads. So I think it's just a fascinating connection here, and it really shows how we're always learning much more about turquoise and its history. And you'll see here these photographs here of the beads that Joshua gave me, these little pieces of turquoise, and you can see, especially on the little tiny bottom one, you'll see the little hole there where it was being drilled out for a necklace. So once again, the history of turquoise continues. The stories of turquoise are ongoing, and we're all a part of it.